The title of our conversation is going to be the power of investing systems. And we're really going to take a deep dive into what a system is, the power of a system. Do you have a system? Do you not have a system? And then how do you make a system effective in the investment game? So anything you want to say as we march into this?
I'm excited, Greg. Let's get rolling.
So thanks for joining us. In each conversation, we have assertions that we make. The first assertion we have for the conversation today is systems provide order and clarity in the face of complexity.
Second assertion, your financial systems are perfectly designed to get the result you're currently getting.
Assertion number 3, all investors have the same goal.
And fourth, risk-adjusted systems may help investors accomplish their financial goals.
These are going to be good to go through, Nick. And what I'm excited about, as you look at these assertions, like some of them might be a little counterintuitive, like this idea of all investors have the same goals. Is that accurate? Well, we're going to prove the case. Let's start with assertion number 1. Systems provide order and clarity in the face of complexity. And that's really the power of a system, is that there's something that's chaotic and scattered, and organizing it creates power, clarity, conciseness, reliability, all of that. So here's an example that I think is very effective, and it's FedEx. When you think of the millions and millions of parcels that are sent every single day and what's relied upon for those parcels to get delivered, it's a really high stakes game. And if you think about what the challenge and the problem that FedEx solved is that they created a system to be able to answer the question of how can I reliably get my content to somebody else, maybe overnight or even in a shorter period of time. And that wasn't going on previously. So when you think about FedEx, it's a miracle. It really is a miracle. I go and I take my box and I put it in another box and I just leave it there. And my expectation is by walking outside my office, putting it in a box, it's going to arrive in maybe Indiana or Florida tomorrow morning. So it goes in there, then it goes to the plant. And in the plant, it gets processed and it gets on an airplane. It could be all over the world. I mean, FedEx has a huge amount of aircraft in the sky. From the aircraft, it goes to the truck, the plant, and then it goes to the truck. And then from the truck, it gets on the desk of the client. And it's amazing. It really is. And it's not perfect, but it takes something that's so chaotic, so many options for failure, and it really does systematize it. So the thing that's so powerful about this is that every single checkpoint along the way, there's not like a decision point. It's just scan it, put it here, scan it, put it here. It may seem kind of boring and routine, but it works. And there's really some power to be said about that. And we're going to point back to this later in our conversation of the power of a systematic process when it comes to investing. Another example that I like to point to, this is a game we call the number game. And we do this in our workshops. We hand out a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper, there's a group of numbers that look like this. And what the challenge of the game is to identify in order the numbers. So 1, 2, 3, and circle each 1, 2, 3, and we give the participants 30 seconds to go through this. And it's really interesting. Like there's kind of like this stress that comes on. It's like overwhelming, it's confusing. There's so much data points here. And when you're measuring up against the clock, it really adds an additional level of stress to the conversation. So when we give people that first run around to go through it, typically it ends up being somewhere around 25, maybe 30, where somebody can identify 1, 2, 3, 4, and get to 30 in 30 seconds.
And that's out of 60, 1 to 60.
Yeah. So when you think about chaotic and stress and not being systematized, that's really what's going on. There's so much to handle, so much to process. So what we do is we turn over the page and there's that same outlook of numbers. And what we do is we start to create a system. And it's very simple. We draw a line between the 2 and the 13 vertically, and then we draw a line between the 9 and the 3 across the page horizontally. And as we do this, we've now created more of a system. There's 4 quadrants in place. And there's a method to the madness with this system. And what you see is that number 1 is in the top left corner of the quadrant. Number 2 is in the top left corner of the second quadrant. Number 3, guess where that is? Yep, the top left corner of the bottom quadrant, and then 4, top left corner of the bottom right quadrant. So there's a system to it, and it actually becomes replicatable, it becomes reliable, and as you look at, okay, now I've got to find number 5. Well, that's where you ended, so you go back up to quadrant 1. There's 5. Well, guess where number 6 is? Okay, right there. 7, 8. And as people discover this process, and we point it out to them on that second page, we give them the opportunity to go through it again. Same amount of time, same situation, there's just a system in place. And by having that system in place, all of a sudden what originally became chaotic and stressful becomes enjoyable and actually exciting. So we get, the second go around, people get to maybe even 50, maybe even 60, because they can follow the process, they can follow the system, and it's reliable. So systems do create clarity and order in the face of complexity.
Let's look at assertion number 2. So assertion number 2, your financial systems are perfectly designed to get the results you're currently getting. Now, everyone has a financial system. Every single person has a financial system, and for some of those people, it was intentional, and some of those people, the system that you're using, you don't even know it's a system because of how unintentional it is.
Well, I think that's the point that comes up a lot of times, that people will say, no, I don't have a financial system, and I'm shooting it from the hip. Well, your system is shooting it from the hip in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of the numbers game. It's just this cloud of chaos. There's not a whole lot of intention going on with the budget, not a whole lot of intention going on with insurance planning or taxes or investing. It's just a cloud of chaos.
Yeah.
Okay. So nevertheless, the whole point being, your personal financial system is perfectly designed to get the results you are currently getting. Let me say that another way, Greg. You, me, the people watching couldn't have designed a more clear and better process to get the results they're currently getting around finances, around budgeting, around savings, around investing. It's just perfect.
The thing that stands out to me about that is that should be very encouraging, because it shows the power that you have. Meaning that if you would have 5 years ago said, I want to be at this place today, and where that place is where you're at today, you've done the exact things that you needed to do to get to that place. Whether that was intentional or unintentional, whether you like that place or you don't like that place, the point is it worked. So you have power to follow a system, whether that's intentional or unintentional.
And what Greg is saying, you're saying this is good news, and here's why. James Clear has a great quote on this. He says, your life today is essentially the sum of your systems. What we repeatedly do each and every day ultimately forms the results we enjoy and the goals we achieve. So here's the good news part. Change your habits, change your systems, and you'll transform your life.
Yeah, it's empowering, because you see that it really is, we are slaves to the system, or slaves to our habits. As Ogmandino says, it's like, we're slave to our habits, we might as well make good habits. We want to be slave to effective systems. And when we look at what an effective system is that really most of our systems run on autopilot. We're processing so much on a day-to-day basis that if it does take a lot of mental processing, we're not going to be very effective at keeping that system in place. So what a system needs to be in order to be successful, it needs to be automated, it needs to be systematic, and it needs to be unemotional. If the system is relying on our discipline every single day, we are emotional creatures, and that system probably isn't going to always work. We're not quite like Dr. Spock in Star Trek. We can be emotional creatures, and we just wake up some days and I don't feel motivated. That happens. And if your system is dependent on how you're feeling when you wake up, you really aren't going to have much control over that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if you have a system in your life, whether it's financial related or anything else, if it's reliant on your emotions, and if it's reliant on your ability to remember what's next, it's just not a very effective or reliable system.
Yeah, and think back on that idea with the FedEx. If there's all these different points and people had to identify all in the FedEx system, all these different processes, they'd be overwhelmed with the amount of information that's flowing at them and the amount of parcels that are coming their way. So it's very systematic, it's automated, it's unemotional, and that's why FedEx works. So the key is like your car, your systems don't think, they just work. Like your car doesn't think, okay, what do I do next? What happens next? A system that in order to be effective is almost like unemotional. It's not human based. You know, the whole point of what I'm saying is that whether it's raining outside or whether it's snowing outside, the car just turns on.
And what's interesting is it works according to its design. The engine is designed in a certain way to get a specific result, and it's not reliant on the engine's emotions. It's not reliant on how the engine feels. You turn on the engine, and it's going to work according to its design.
You know, and there's always checkpoints where it might be out of integrity, where it's not working, you know, a certain part breaks down. But if the system was established, you know where to look to find the correction for that.
Perfect.
Which leads to assertion number 3. Assertion number 3 is that all investors have the same goal. And again, this may seem counterintuitive because we see a barrage of marketing material that tells us that's not the case. Everyone has distinct goals and everyone has different ideas. So here's an example of what we might see in marketing. Develop a customized portfolio that is uniquely tailored to your preferences to stand the test of time. Now, the thing that's interesting about this, Nick, who wouldn't want a portfolio to stand the test of time that's uniquely catered to you? So it sounds very appealing. Another one, our individually customized portfolios are carefully crafted to provide quality stocks and funds that fit your needs. Because nobody wouldn't want a quality stock and fund inside their portfolio. So of course, we're not going to put the junky ones in your portfolio.
Now see if this one sounds familiar. Everyone is different. One size doesn't fit all. We create individually customized portfolios to meet each of our clients' different dispositions. Now, there's a lot of truth in this. For example, everyone is different. That's true, no question about it. And who wouldn't want a customized portfolio to meet your specific needs? Everybody would want a portfolio that meets their specific needs.
As we look at these, it sounds all right. That's, again, companies spend millions and millions of dollars on marketing, so they're not dumb on why they put these into the phrases. It's because it's what really speaks to us, that we are unique. I am a unique individual, so I deserve a unique portfolio. I've sacrificed, I've worked my tail off to be able to create this money. I want something customized to me. However, the statements may sound appealing. They do. But upon further questioning and really diving into it, each one is absolute nonsense. And that may seem counter, but hear this out. What I'm not saying is that there are different needs at different stages in life. So I'm not saying that everyone is in the same stage of life and everyone has the same life cycle. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is how you make money in the stock market. Whether you're a 65-year-old versus a 30-year-old, that doesn't really change. Like, think about it this way, Nick. Like, think about an exercise routine. Like, being able to move up and down is a really important function in life. But if I'm 30, I can maybe put a couple plates on a bar and do some squats. But if I'm 70, I shouldn't be doing that kind of intensity. But I still need to be able to get down and get back up. So I need to work that same exercise. So everyone has different maybe intensity and has different flow of how they should be doing those exercises or how they should be in the market. But the concept and the principles of how money works in the market are the same regardless of what age you're at.
Great point.
So as we look at this, every investor has the same goal. And it's irrefutable. I mean, it's airtight logic. You can't question this. Every investor has the goal to achieve the highest possible return for the level of risk they're comfortable taking. So no one would knowingly accept a lower rate of return at a level of risk where they could get a higher rate of return. Everyone wants the highest rate of return possible for the level of risk that they're willing to take. Anything you'd say about that, Nick?
No.
I mean, it's really clear, isn't it?
It's really clear.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
So as we look at this, here's a question that I have for financial advisors when they talk about these customized portfolios. Is, do you have a philosophy? Like, really, do you have a philosophy on how markets work? And does that philosophy apply evenly to each client? So, or is it really just the flavor of the day, the emotions that you wake up with? And again, as I talked about, the problem with that is that we have no control over how we might wake up in the morning. We're just emotional creatures sometimes.
Mm-hmm. One thing to consider, Greg, is it could be just the flavor of the day, the prediction of the day for the advisor, or is it just a marketing pitch that you're customizing portfolios for each and every client? Because it really doesn't make sense to customize portfolios for each and every different client, because the principles of economics are the same regardless of clients. And it does come back to this first question: do you have a philosophy on how markets work? And does that philosophy apply evenly to each client?
Yeah, and you know, when I first started in the industry, I'd go to these investment conferences and they would tout, hey, we're going to take clients through this questionnaire to be able to identify their unique goals and preferences, and then we'll customize a portfolio. And that, you know, it sounds awesome, but as I really sat with that for a couple years, really thinking about this, it just never felt quite right. The reason is because if, let's just use an individual stock as an example. If Apple stock is a great stock, wouldn't I want that for that client and that client and that client if they really do want to make money? Yeah. Or if they want to be in a certain asset category, then yes, absolutely, they should be in each of these different asset categories, and I want all exposure to all of my clients for those asset categories, depending again on the intensity, like the squat exercise.
Yeah, so again, it leads to the second question here, which is, shouldn't the only difference from one client to the next hinge on when money is needed? Because Greg, like what you're saying, there's different life cycles, and a 30-year-old is in a different stage of life than a 70-year-old, and maybe the intensity of how those economic principles are applied would be different from client to client. Nevertheless, the underlying philosophy would be the same for every client regardless of life cycle. And Greg, that really does go right into assertion number 4, which is risk-adjusted systems may help investors accomplish their goals.
So the optimal question really is how do I maximize the return for the level of risk I'm willing to take? And it's important to have both parts of this sentence, is maximizing the return and including the level of risk that I'm willing to take. And most people leave off that second part, for the level of risk I'm willing to take. There's all kinds of investments out there where you could possibly get a higher rate of return, but most people aren't comfortable with those types of investments because they are very risky. So it is the maximum rate of return with the level of risk I'm willing to take.
And Greg, a lot of people just don't even know to ask that question.
Yeah,
it's the normal question to go into the advisor's office and say, Greg, how can I get the highest possible return? And they wouldn't even know, or consider, risk. There's varying levels of risk, and I should maximize my return for the level of risk I'm comfortable taking. That's not just something you wake up thinking. So that's really our job as the advisor. It brings it back to risk. Hey, how much risk are you willing to take? And from there, then let's maximize the level of return that's available, or capitalize on the level of return that is available.
Yeah, so enter Dr. Harry Markowitz. Harry Markowitz answered this question for all investors. And the beauty of Dr. Markowitz's work is that it can be universally applied no matter what life cycle or stage you are at in the game. Nick, the interesting thing about Dr. Markowitz, as you know, he won the Nobel Prize in 1990 for work that he started in 1950. And it wasn't really that the computers weren't up to speed at that time in 1950 to validate his work. But he was just such an intellect and he had such a keen mind about diversification and the power of markets that answering this question did earn him the Nobel Prize when the computers caught up to Dr. Markowitz.
It's a really fascinating idea to consider that he had ideas that at the time we didn't have the computational skills as a society to verify until later, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. Dr. Markowitz wrote we've got a trilogy of his books here on our desk here, titled Risk and Return Analysis. And just to be able to grasp, these aren't leisurely readings before you go to bed, Nick. These are books that you really do have to have an advanced degree in statistics, economics, and just finance to be able to understand what he's talking about with the math computations. Now, the beauty of Dr. Markowitz's work is that, yes, it is very complex, and you may not be able to quite understand it, but it's very similar to aerodynamics. You don't have to understand all the principles and theories of aerodynamics to enjoy flight. just like with Dr. Markowitz work, you don't have to be able to study these books and underline them to be able to reap the benefits of his research. So we're going to outline for you what that is and how his research really can help answer that question of optimal returns for the level of risk that you take.
So a massive takeaway from these series of books is this rule here. Modern portfolio theory is a financial theory that attempts to maximize portfolio return for a given level of risk through diversification.
So by adding diversification to a portfolio, it allows you to be able to maximize returns and reduce your risk. When we talk about diversification, most people measure the market based off of the S&P and the Dow. But what there's actually much, much more to the markets than just the S&P and the Dow. The S&P and the Dow is just US large growth stocks. But there's other asset categories like US small growth stocks, large value stocks, US small value stocks, international large stocks, international small stocks. And then you can even bring bonds into the mix and have intermediate term bonds or short term bonds. Bringing each of these asset classes into a portfolio allows an investor at any given level of risk to optimize their rate of return.
And these are just examples. These are 6, 7 examples we have on the screen. There's a whole world available of investments in the global market. And to Greg's point, what he's saying is using more asset categories, bringing them into your portfolio, diversifying more throughout the globe, it's very likely, if you do it correctly, one, you can increase your expected return, but also at the exact same time lower your level of risk. And that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so this is his baby right here. This is the brainchild of Dr. Markowitz, and it is the Markowitz efficient frontier. What it lays out is that on the bottom, on the x-axis, that's your level of risk. So less risk, more risk. And then on the y-axis, long-term rate of return. So lower returns, higher returns. And most people think that risk and return are equal, like it'd be a straight line, but the power of Dr. Markowitz's research is that there's actually this bow in it. It's a little bit of a curve. So by owning stock A or by owning stock B, owning them individually, yeah, you might get a good return, but by combining them, you might actually increase the rate of return and lower your risk.
All right, let's break this into a bit more detail. So here we have, on the previous slide, we had the concept. Now we're getting more detailed. So when we say risk here on the bottom axis, we're actually measuring that by standard deviation. And then on the left axis, we have the return. And so for any portfolio, someone comes into our office, we can analyze the portfolio and we can plot exactly on this graph where their portfolio is. We would just plot it by the standard deviation and then give the expected return. And what we see pretty often, Greg, is something that looks like this. Notice how the yellow dot, the portfolio, is below the line, meaning it's either taking too much risk for the return it's getting, or it's not getting a high enough return for the level of risk it's taking.
No one would intentionally choose to put their portfolio right here. That's the point.
Or anywhere below the line.
I mean, like that's what stands out to prospective clients as they come in to meet with us is they've been operating on the assumption that they are diversified and that they are getting an efficient return for the risk that they're taking. But when we plot out and see the global diversification, not just US stocks that are large, we see that there's an underperformance right here. So there's some options that are created by recognizing where you fall on the Markowitz efficient frontier. And let's just walk through what some of those examples could be. Option number one would be that if you're okay with this level of return, so the level of return is right there. If you're okay with that, you could come over, diversify it, spread out the risk even more, and then get the exact same expected return and reducing that risk level. That's a really powerful idea for people. If they're okay with the returns that they're getting, let's lower the volatility on it.
Another option could be, well, if you're comfortable with this level of risk or this level of standard deviation, through diversification, we can actually increase the expected return that you'll experience through long-term ownership of that portfolio.
The third option, which is really kind of the best of both worlds, is let's reduce the volatility and the risk and get a higher rate of return. And a lot of people choose to go with that option because it's the best of both worlds, lower risk with a higher expected return. It's as much of a free lunch as you can get yet you are still taking on an understandable and a clearly defined level of risk.
Yeah, fourth option is people oftentimes don't know is available. Hey, I can diversify into these global markets and really shoot for the stars here and increase my risk, but at the same time also increase my return. That sounds pretty sweet to me.
Well, as we look at this, it really does, going back to the number game, it creates clarity, it creates order in the face of chaos. I mean, like for most people, when they come in and start talking to us about investing, investing seems complex, confusing, overwhelming, stressful, somewhat like the number game. Remember the number game where it's just all over the place, so much to process. And again, when you have so much to process, it becomes a stressful experience. And we don't want investing to be a stressful experience. It really should create clarity and confidence.
Yeah, something that reminds me of, Greg, is going back to the FedEx idea. As the consumer or the one using the service, I just scan my package, put it into the box, and I don't really worry about it until it's at its destination. And it can be the same with your portfolio. You come in, you meet with us, you tell us how much risk you want to take. Then, behind the scenes, without you having to worry about it every single day and make all these decisions at every decision point, your portfolio is being optimized every single day. Your allocation is being perfected every single day across all of the different global categories, across all the individual stocks in the portfolio. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's just how much level of risk are you comfortable taking, and we take on the rest of it.
Yeah, and this can throw investors off because they think it should be more complex than this. And they look for that complexity because they think complexity means sophistication. That's not always the case. When we think about the number game, that complexity did not create a more enjoyable experience. When there was order and system, it was actually a fun and enjoyable experience to people to go from quadrant to quadrant.
And people tend to get better results.
And they get better results because they're not so overwhelmed. And the interesting thing about that is when we get into a scenario where it's like this year, this is an election year, there's a lot of feeling going on and a lot of emotion about what's going to take place. Should I be changing my portfolio allocation? You know, the last couple of years we've experienced a high level of inflation. Do I need to make some adjustments to this? Seeing the wars that are going on in different areas of the world, do I need to make allocation adjustments? So people feel like they constantly need to be making changes in order to not mess things up. Well, the beauty of diversification, the power of Dr. Markowitz's work, is that it doesn't constantly need to be stressful experience for the investor.
Even in stressful environments like political climates like now where we have an election year.
Yeah.
And we even have a similar conversation to this one, which is investing in an election year. And if you're interested, you can give us a call.
Yeah. So to wrap up, we do have some important questions that we feel like each investor should ask for themselves. The first question is, do you have a system to academically measure portfolio volatility? Is it really clear? Is it concise? Like on that curve, do you know where you fall? Most people say, well, I'm conservative or I'm aggressive, or I'm more middle, moderate. Those are really mystifying words and they don't mean much. It doesn't provide clarity, where an academically measured portfolio to identify volatility, that's going to provide organization in chaos.
Greg, what I love about this question is a lot of times I'll have people in my office and I'll ask, hey, is it important for you to control risk in your portfolio? Of course, they'll say yes, as most people would. And then I'll ask them, do you know how to measure it? And the answer is always no. So the follow-up to that is, well, do you think you can control something you don't know how to measure? And so it goes right hand in hand with this first question. Do you have a system to academically measure portfolio volatility?
Perfect. Number two, do you consistently and predictably achieve market rates of return? Now, in order to get clarity on this question, you have to know what market rates of return are, and are you achieving them? The beauty of Markowitz's curve is it identifies what the market rates of return are, not just in the US market, but international, emerging markets. And it plots you on if you're getting the return that you should be getting for the level of risk that you're taking.
And the third question, Greg, here is, do you have a clear system for measuring the success or failure of your portfolio? And if I ask somebody in my office, hey, how's your portfolio doing? And what are you measuring that against? Well, a lot of people will say, I was positive last year. You know, I wasn't negative.
I made money.
I made money.
It's doing okay.
It's doing all right. you know, I got a 6% return last year, okay, but what if a 20% was available for the level of risk that you were taking last year?
Yeah.
And the question becomes, oh, whoa, am I leaving a lot of money on the table? And so the point is there is a system to measure whether or not your portfolio is succeeding or failing.
Yeah. And the last question that we'll ask is this. When it comes to your investments, is there anything more important than maximizing your expected return for the level of risk you're taking? I think that encompasses everything that we've talked about, the system, the rate of return. And so as you look at this, there really isn't much more to investing than maximizing the return for the level of risk that you're taking. So the follow-up question that comes with that is, do you have a system to accomplish that? And hopefully what you've seen as we've gone through this conversation is that there is a power in having a system. It provides clarity. And then also the last thing that I'll say is that there actually is a way to be able to invest without the stress and the anxiety of trying to always figure out what's going to happen next. So we'll wrap up where we started with the assertions. Assertion number 1 was, systems provide order and clarity in the face of complexity.
Assertion number 2, your financial systems are perfectly designed to get the results you're currently getting.
Assertion number 3, all investors have the same goal.
And assertion number 4, risk-adjusted systems may help investors accomplish their financial goals.
We want to thank you for joining us on this conversation, and we look forward to having more with you going forward. Thanks.